On the buzz meter this Sunday, the missing IRS emails spark confrontation and cover-up charges on Capitol Hill.
Would you please rise to take the oath and raise your right hand? A little higher. Thank you.
But in national newspapers, it's not front-page news, and conservatives are crying foul.
This really is a scam. This is why conservatives don't trust national newspapers. It's why they don't trust broadcast news. It's because you can go back there, or there's a double standard, and you can see it on every broadcast newscast.
With Republicans holding a spate of hearings, should the media treat the IRS mess as a partisan slugfest or a major league scandal? Hillary Clinton and her husband may have made $100 million since leaving the White House, but she tells the newspaper they're not like a lot of people who are truly well off. Really? Are the media starting to obsess on her wealth? Diane Sawyer stepping down as ABC anchor after a remarkable career that included a seemingly endless series of high-profile interviews.
Does it make you feel clueless? Does it make you feel like, what was wrong with me?
I wonder if people are looking for a sentence that begins from you. I should have. I should have.
But as George Stephanopoulos and David Muir split up her duties, is the network anchor job what it used to be? And why are we back to 3 white guys? Plus, the bite felt round the world. The media sink their teeth into the World Cup. What about the folks who just don't like soccer? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. The IRS scandal is back in the news big time, with Republicans roughing up a defiant commissioner in hearings over what on earth happened to Lois Lerner's emails.
I don't believe you. This is incredible.
I have a long career. That's the first time anybody has said that they do not believe me.
Actually, I don't believe you.
Today on Capitol Hill, House Republicans held another fiery hearing on Lois Lerner's missing emails, their third hearing in 5 days.
But the coverage has varied widely, and the pundits have predictably pointed fingers either at the Obama administration or Darrell Issa and his GOP colleagues.
Tonight at 7 o'clock, the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee holds its umpteenth hearing on the phony IRS scandal.
Lots of House Republicans seem to be very happy anytime they have a reason to be mad at some perceived slight or glitch or failure or, yes, scandal in the executive branch.
But Obama critics see this as a colossal failure by the press.
When the lost IRS email story broke, just 3.5 minutes combined on all the network newscasts. Unbelievable. That is a news blackout.
This is unbelievable. We could talk about the New York Post as well. It is impossible that the the Washington Post and the New York Times are not putting on the front page of their newspapers the fact that an internal investigation has been launched by the IRS on the most shady behavior.
Joining us now to examine the coverage, Lauren Ashburn, Fox News contributor and a former USA Today executive who hosts Social Buzz on the Fox website. Amy Holmes, who anchors the Hot List at The Blaze. And Julie Mason, host of the Press Pool at Sirius XM Radio. Conservative commentators, as we just heard, say the IRS story is being way underplayed. Should the Washington Post and the New York Times have put the missing emails on the front page?
Yes, it was a big mistake. The New York Times put it on A19. This is a scandal. And, you know, the fact that it's not being covered suggests that the liberals think that it's a conservative witch hunt, which it isn't.
Well, it's not that it's not being covered. There's a question of the volume and the display and the prominence. But in this digital age when you can read all the stories online, why does it matter so much what is or isn't in the paper front page?
Every day between at 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, people go into newsrooms all across the country and have meetings, and each of the managing editors around the table says what the hot stories are of the day. The front page editor then says, I'll take the best one of those. So it is still a barometer, at least on the front page of newspaper, in the newspaper world, of what's important in that newsroom.
The argument on the right is that the press, or some elements of the press, are deliberately muffling this story to protect President Obama, who, in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, again talked about phony scandals. Would you go that far?
I don't know if I would go so far as to say that they're protecting President Obama, but I think that they have sympathy for President Obama and the Democratic side of the aisle, and, of course, liberal ideology. And if it's being covered by conservatives or being investigated by Republicans, then, of course, it must be a partisan witch hunt. But you say that the press, it's not a matter of not covering it, it's a matter of volume. In fact, there are stories that they're not covering, like, for example, that the IRS had to settle with the National Organization for Marriage for $50 grand. A judge told them that there was wrongdoing there when the IRS improperly, probably illegally, leaked their donor list to a political activist who then published this information. Also, the press isn't reporting, I think, sufficiently that the IRS commissioner himself is a huge Democratic donor. He's given nearly $100 grand to the Democratic Party.
He is a political appointee, Amy.
But why isn't this a part of the story?
Fair enough. But now Lois Lerner's attorney is mounting a bit of a counteroffensive. He's talked to Politico and CNN and said she had no idea why her emails were missing. She complained at the time. She's angry about it. But look, we talk about the volume of coverage. All three network newscasts covered the first of the 3 IRS hearings on Friday night. But then there's a hearing Monday night. And then there's a hearing on Tuesday. At what point does it become less newsworthy?
All these hearings, all these investigations, where's the proof of the crime? Howie, this morning there were 100,000 stories on Google News about this IRS investigation. There's just a welter of coverage, but there's no
read every one?
Every single one. There's no proof of a crime, and the coverage reflects that. Every journalist in town would love if there was proof of a scandal. They would be galloping after it. They're not trying to protect President Obama.
Of a crime if the IRS is mysteriously getting rid of these emails that the investigators have looked
for. Where it's up to the lawmakers to find the proof. They have the power to do that.
Judicial Watch, for example, is suing to try to get this information, and we know that the IRS has spent $4.4 billion on IT over the last 4 years. Why isn't that also a part of the story?
There's no question this doesn't pass the smell test,
no,
but it doesn't mean.
The White House is so flippant about it, but that doesn't mean crime happened.
It's jobs to get to the bottom of the truth.
Okay. How much has the coverage been affected, in your view, by the fact that the IRS Commissioner, John Koskinen, not exactly a humble public servant?
The optics for him are really bad. He comes across as anything but humble. He comes across as holier than thou, and I think when the media get someone like that in their clutches, they are going to talk about that. That's something that someone's personality, when they seem to be better than everyone else, is something that gets coverage.
Hasn't this become a story as much about IRS arrogance and government incompetence as about the original charge here, which remains unproven, about why was there so much unfair tax scrutiny aimed at Tea Party conservatives? I mean, that's not unproven. It's the White House involvement that we're still digging into.
Well, it's the original accusations, the original allegations, and now the cover-up. And I think the cover-up is just as big a story. And what is it that they're covering up? We know that the commissioner now was being dishonest in his testimony in those hearings about this whole email situation, that he claimed that they were digging for them, and that now he admits that they had been somehow destroyed on this hard drive, which no IT expert believes.
Would the coverage have been different if this had happened in the Bush administration?
Absolutely, absolutely. Charles Krauthammer said right here on Fox News that if this were a Republican administration, there would be calls for impeachment.
It did happen in the Bush administration. You remember all those emails that were lost in the Attorney General investigation. Exact same thing. It happened in the Clinton administration, too. It got the same kind of coverage. Prove that there was a deliberate attempt to cover it up, and then it becomes a crime. Until then, it just really looks bad.
It looks really bad. Everybody can agree on that? But your standard is how much does this progress toward proving the underlying allegations, which are and the fact that this story has been kicking around now, does that affect the media's judgment on whether it's how newsworthy it was?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And there's been tremendous coverage on how crappy and spotty the federal government's computer systems are and the record keeping.
You just did. Yeah. You just did.
But let's face it, the New York Times even admitted that they were slow to come to the story, that they didn't they didn't give it prominent coverage.
Yeah, but they've done more than a dozen stories. How many do we need?
Okay, but it was the New York Times ombudsman, Margaret Sullivan, who said the paper had been somewhat late to the story. By somewhat late, 3 days late. 3 days to report something that was on the wires, that was online. The fact that there were all these missing Lois Lerner emails, I think that's inexcusable. I want to turn now to John Boehner announcing and getting a lot of coverage for announcing that he and the House intend to sue President Obama over excessive use of executive orders exceeding his constitutional authority. This is not just a right-left argument. Here's Fox's Neil Cavuto talking to Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann about how, in Cavuto's view, this ain't a big deal.
Where was your rage when Democrats were going after President Bush on the same use of executive orders? Because I think you knew then that was a waste of time then, and I think you know in your heart of hearts this is a waste of time.
So everybody covered this, but is this lawsuit something of a stunt?
Of course it is. I mean, it's ridiculous that it could even go forward, potentially. But it's politics, and it is so much more interesting to cover politics than it is to cover policy. If he had talked just about executive action and what it means and why it's wrong and why he shouldn't have done this, instead of saying, I'm suing the president, he wouldn't have had nearly as much coverage.
I'm all for covering political stunts. It's a lot of fun. But, I mean, the House would have to get a court ruling that it has the standing to sue a different branch of government. The courts are traditionally reluctant to get involved in that. Right. So are you surprised it's gotten as much media attention as it has?
I'm surprised that it hasn't gotten more, to tell you the truth.
You think this is underplayed as well?
I do, but I agree with the, also a conservative critique that this isn't the proper way to be trying to address what's essentially a political problem. But I think John Boehner, as a political matter, is using it as a vehicle to focus attention on this and also media attention, that each step of this process will get coverage.
Nor is Barack Obama the first president to use executive orders and executive action to try to get what he couldn't get from Congress. But is it hard for the media, Julie, to resist the sort of easy headlines, speaker to sue president? Yeah,
it's great. The standard used to be, go ahead and sue, and then we'll do the story. But now the threat to sue becomes a story. But, Howie, what I'm hearing from the journalists covering this is that this move by Boehner is to appease the impeachment enthusiasts in his own caucus.
Well, and it gets the I word out there, right? I mean, that's what rallies the base, is that word, impeachment.
But there was also a Supreme Court decision this week, unanimous 9-0, really slapping at the president, not just for executive orders, but overstepping his constitutional authority.
Right. Well, these are important constitutional issues, no question about it. We'll lead the program when the House actually files this suit and has the standing to do so. Send me a tweet about our show during this hour, at Howard Kurtz. We'll read the best messages at the end of the program. When we come back, Hillary still talking about her bank account in a PBS interview. Is this becoming a media obsession? And later, the big bite and other absurdities in covering the World Cup.